welcome my
Summer.
good friend, Summer.
We're going to give her the chance. She's the expert, so she's going to be doing the talking this one. We're just going to get out of the way.
Thank you.
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Summer Inanen, and I'm a registered holistic nutritionist. I'm also the on-site nutritionist as well as a trainer here at Quantum CrossFit in Toronto. And so I'm going to be doing these nutrition talks like every couple months probably, depending on interest. So if anyone has any suggestions on topics, I'm all ears. Today we're going to talk all about fat because there's a lot of confusion about fats. So we're going to talk about the different types of fat, which fats are good, which ones are bad, a little bit about heart disease and cholesterol, and then talk about kind of like what to look for when you're buying fats, how much you should be eating, and that's pretty much it. So you guys can feel free to ask me questions along the way if you like, or you can save them for the end. I'm pretty easygoing. So basically when it comes to fat's really good for us and we need it. It plays a few different important roles in the body. So first of all, we need it as a source of fuel. So especially when you eliminate things like sugar and grains from the diet, you need the calories and you need something to provide you with that energy. And so fat is a really good fuel source and it's used really efficiently and effectively as fuel. It's also the most satiating nutrient, so it keeps you fuller longer. So that's why I always tell my clients to make sure they eat a good amount of fat at every meal in order to keep them going to the next meal. And then lastly, fat plays a few really important roles in the body. It pretty much supports almost every organ system, and if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be able to survive. So, but there's different types of fats, and so there's three major types of fats that I'm going to talk about. So there's saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, and polyunsaturated fats. I can write them on the board. That's easier. So we have saturated, mono, unsaturated, and poly. And basically, the way that I want you to think about them in terms of their classifications is just in relation to their stability. So saturated fats are the most stable fat. That's why if you have something like butter or coconut oil, it can sit out on the counter and it stays solid, versus something like a polyunsaturated fat like sunflower oil, which is liquid and may even stay liquid when you refrigerate it. So the stability refers to its stability in relation to heat, light, and air. So saturated fats are more stable, whereas on the other end of the spectrum, polyunsaturated fats are the least stable, and in the middle is the monounsaturated fats. So when it comes to the different types of fats, monounsaturated fats are good fats. So they're really good for you. They're the ones that even people like Dr. Oz will tell you to eat lots of, and they include things like avocados, olive oil, olives, and then some nuts that have a higher percentage of monounsaturated fats. So in particular, macadamia nuts have a higher ratio. And they help to suppress inflammation. They help to allow your body to become more sensitive to insulin. So they play a lot of important roles and they're good. And so you can eat those ones abundantly. The other type of fat, polyunsaturated fats, are ones that you have probably heard of as like the essential fats, so omega-3 and omega-6. And they're called essential because we have to get them from food. So whereas with other fats, they can be constructed from other parts in our body, the omega-3s and omega-6s have to be obtained from food sources. And so omega-3s are really good fats as well, and they play a lot of important roles. So they're anti-inflammatory, they help support our immune system, they support our brain, they support our heart, and they play many other important roles in the body. The form that we need of omega-3 fats has an acronym, because I'm not going to spell the whole word, but it's the EPA and DHA. So that's kind of the form that we need. So they come in different forms. And we get that from cold water fish like salmon, herring, mackerel, and anchovies, as well as 100% grass-fed beef and algae, which the fish eat, hence they have a high concentration of it. And that's really the only source that we can get it get it from. So you might have heard people say, well, I get my omega-3s from flax or walnuts. Well, while they do have omega-3s, it's a different form. So their form of the acronym is ALA. And it does convert into the EPA and DHA, but think about it like a game of telephone. So when one person starts with a message and then it goes around the room, you start to lose that message along the way. And it's the same thing with ALA converting into the EPA and DHA. Along the way, you lose most of it, and you only end up with about 3%. So that's why flax and walnut is never an optimal source of omega-3s, because you'd have to eat so much, and it becomes problematic because those nuts and seeds also have a high concentration of omega-6, which we don't want too much of, and we'll talk about why pretty much right now. So omega-3s we want to get from the EPA and DHA, and the required amount is about eating like about a pound of the fish that I mentioned a week will give you kind of that optimal amount. And if you don't eat that much fish, then looking to supplement, and then obviously eating like 100% grass-fed beef as well is going to help support that. So on the contrary, on the other side we have omega-6 fats, and omega-6 fats, while they're essential as well, we tend to get way too much of them, and they promote inflammation in the body when we consume too much of them. And inflammation's, like chronic low-grade inflammation is at the root of pretty much any modern disease, whether it's like diabetes, heart disease, insulin resistance, like all those things are connected to chronic low-grade inflammation. So we always want to be managing our inflammation levels. And we get way too much of the omega-6 fat. And the reason why is because the highest concentration of them comes from seed oils, and oils like canola oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, corn oil, soybean oil, all of those kind of vegetable oils that are really common. That's the biggest sort of source of excess omega-6 fats, and those fats are really toxic to us. So for one, because we're getting too many, they're promoting inflammation in the body. The second reason is that, especially when we talk about canola, corn, and soybean-based oils, they predominantly come from genetically modified organisms. So around 90%, depending on the seed, is genetically modified. So if you're not buying organic, you're pretty much getting a genetically modified seed. And the problem with GMOs is that it's almost like a science experiment on ourselves, because they're so new. There hasn't been a lot of long-term research in terms of the implications of them. But what they have found with the short-term research is that they lead to things like infertility, issues with the immune system, gastrointestinal problems, and as well as like issues with different organs in the body. So avoiding GMOs is a good thing, and we do that by cutting out those vegetable oils as well. And lastly, those oils go through a really intensive refining process. So they get treated with a chemical called hexane, then they get exposed to a stage called degumming and bleaching, and then they're deodorized. So it's a super intense refining process where you end up with like remnants of toxins, and you lose any of the nutritional value that those seeds had in the first place. You also lose any of the kind of omega-3 content that they did have. And you end up with a fat that's really unstable. So like we talked about the difference between the saturated and the polyunsaturated, with the polyunsaturated being the most unstable, those fats are really unstable. And so what that means is that they oxidize or go rancid really easily when they're exposed to heat, light, or air. And that includes just the light from sitting on the grocery store shelf and like the temperature of your kitchen. So if you leave a bowl of canola oil out on the counter, you'll be able to smell the difference, and you'll be able to see what going rancid means versus leaving butter out on the counter. They're really unstable, and that can lead to damage in our body when we consume them. In addition to that, when they get heated, they can create free radicals, which cause damage in the body as well. So the three kind of main reasons why we want to avoid those oils are: one, they promote a lot of inflammation; two, they come from genetically modified organisms for the most part; and three, they're really unstable, so they go rancid and oxidize really quickly. So There's other sources of omega-6 too, so things like nuts and seeds that do have more nutritional value, and you can consume those, but you still don't want to overdo it because too much can be pro-inflammatory in the body. And a lot of times you'll hear that it's about the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. So back in like ancient times, we had a more optimal ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, which was about 1 to 2 or 1 to 4, meaning we had, that's omega-3 to omega-6. Whereas in modern day times, it's closer to like 1 to 12, and that's because of those vegetable oils, because those oils are found in pretty much every single packaged good. Any fast food restaurant, most restaurants for that matter, contain those oils. And so if you pick up anything like a box of cereal, a box of crackers, you're going to see one of those fats on it. And that's why people overconsume them. So we get a much higher ratio, but it's less about the ratio, because even if you're consuming a lot of the vegetable oils, it doesn't mean you can overcompensate by high dosing on fish oil to get the omega-3s. That's not healthy either, because remember, those are still unstable fats. So you just want to get the amount that you need of omega-3s through food, and then reduce consumption of omega-6 by eliminating any of those vegetable oils, as well as just moderating the consumption of other nuts and seeds and other high sources of omega-6. So those are the polyunsaturated fats. So the last type of fat is saturated fat. And so saturated fat has been given a bad reputation over the years because it's been linked with heart disease and other health conditions like cancer. But in reality, saturated fat plays a really important role in our body, and we need it. So it helps to support our nervous system and our brain. So half of our brain is made of saturated fat. And so it becomes really important, especially people who are depressed or have ADHD. They need that saturated fat to help support their brain health. In addition to that, saturated fat helps to support the immune system, it helps to suppress inflammation, and it also helps us to become more sensitive to insulin, which is good. So we need it. It's not a bad fat. And so, but people often say, well, what about that study about heart disease and about cancer? And I'm just going to quote someone who did a better job of writing it than me. From the book, It Starts With Food by Dallas and Melissa Hartwig. In terms of the studies about heart disease, in 2010, the Journal of Clinical Nutrition compiled a landmark meta-analysis of the results of 21 studies. It's like a study of studies. And they found that there was no significant evidence for concluding that dietary saturated fat is associated with an increased risk of heart disease, stroke, or cardiovascular disease. So that study, you don't hear that on Dr. Oz. You always hear about the other ones that are generally pretty flawed. So this one was looking at a whole slew of studies and coming to the conclusion that there's no evidence connecting saturated fat with any of those diseases, and we know that it's actually really supportive to our health. So what's at the root of conditions like heart disease is really inflammation, and chronic inflammation can come from eating too many of the omega-6 fats that we talked about, having too much stress, not getting enough sleep, eating too many sugars and carbohydrates. That's really what's at the root of all of those, like heart disease